Hi everyone, it's Nick Pavlov and welcome to our channel. In this video I wanted to talk about the calculation groups feature and the field parameters in Power BI. These aren't new features per se. Calculation groups was actually introduced a couple of years ago, but before you could only modify calculation groups using Tabular Editor. But at the end of last year, Microsoft introduced the calculation groups feature in Power BI Desktop. I can't remember off the top of my head when exactly that became generally available, but it has been available publicly at least for a couple of months. I was using these features recently, and in this video I wanted to show you how to benefit from the calculation groups feature when building reports. So what is a calculation group? Calculation groups allow you to define DAX calculations once and apply them across multiple measures in your data model. Instead of creating repetitive measures for each calculation, you can now create one calculation group and apply one logic to many measures. To be honest, this definition might seem a little confusing right now, so let me create a few measures and show you an example. So here I have a simple data model with three tables. If I go to the model view, I can see that I have the sales table, the fact table, and then I have a date and product table. Very simple. So first, I am going to show you what we used to do before the calculation groups were introduced. So I will put together a matrix right here, and I'm going to use a slicer and then go to the product table and then grab segment and put different segments on a slicer. In my matrix, I'm going to go to the date, and then I'm going to add year. I can put quarter, and I can use month name. All right. Oops, I actually will put the quarters above year, below year, sorry, and above the month, and then expand this. Then I'm going to go to the sales table and look for and create my first measure, the sales measure. And then I'm going to go ahead and create my very first measure. So that's going to be called sales, and that's going to be a sum of my sales amount column from my fact table, like so. And then I'm going to add this new measure to my matrix, do the proper formatting. All right. Let me drag this down here. Just to remind what I'm doing right now, I will create several measures the way we would create time intelligence calculations before the calculation groups were introduced. This is what we used to do. So I have my first measure, it's called sales. Now what I'm going to do is I will click to my table, and then I will create another measure for the sales last year. I'm going to call that one sales previous year, PY, and that's going to be a calculate measure in which I'm going to use the existing sales measure, all right? And then the filter is going to be same period last year, and I'm going to indicate my the date column from my date table, like this. And I'm going to add that to my matrix. And here I have last year's sales, except obviously 2011, because 2011 is the first year in my matrix, in my data set. Now the third measure I'm going to create is going to be sales year to date, YTD. It's also a simple formula, actually. It's called total YTD right here. And here I'm going to indicate the expression again. That's going to be the sales measure, which I already have. And then the date value here is going to be my date column, like this. All right. It is created. I'm going to add it to my matrix. And here's my sales year to date, right? You can see that the numbers are increasing every month. So a standard year-to-date calculation. So then I can create another measure, which is called sales I could do month to date, but it's very simple to year to date, so I'm just going to skip it. Instead, what I will do is running total. Let me remove this. The mouse, running total, and that's going to be a calculate formula. The sales measure, right? This one here, and it's going to be a filter all selected. Date, it should be date. And then the filter expression in my date is the date column, the selected date should be less or equal to the maximum of the date. All right, so that should be it. I need one more parenthesis and I have my running total ready. Here's my running total. Creating all these measures takes time and effort. And when we create a lot of different measures, this can create clutter. I only have 4 measures here, but imagine if I had 25 or 50 measures, then my entire table, right, will be cluttered by different measures. I mean, of course, we can create different tables for measures. We can create different groups, right? We can put measures into folders, but still, using the calculation groups is just so much faster and better. So before I move forward though, after showing you the old way of creating measures, to avoid confusion, what I'm going to do is I will actually delete all of the other measures here that I created. I don't really need them anymore, so I will go ahead and delete all of the measures except the sales measure. So sales year to date, I will delete this from model because I want to show you from scratch. And then running total will be also deleted. So the only measure that I will leave is called the sales measure now. So I'll take these out as well. So that's the only measure that I have right now. Now I'm going to go to the model view. Since the calculation groups feature is now generally available, you don't have to enable it before using it. I remember several months ago you would have to go to File, Options, and then enable the preview feature, and then exit your Power BI desktop and then start over so you can have the new feature enabled. When you go to the model view, you will see above in the calculations section right here, you see a new button called calculation group. Another new thing here is in the data pane, right here you have a tab called model. And right here we have calculation groups. Right now we don't have any calculation groups, they were not created. And what I'm going to do is I will come here and then click the calculation groups button. And that is going to create my first calculation group. In the calculation groups we have hierarchy, where one calculation group can consist of many calculation items. We can have many calculation items under one calculation group, right? And we can rename these calculation items and groups, so we know which groups they are. For example, we can rename this one. This one is going to be time intelligence. And the calculation group itself, I can also call that time intelligence group. So after that, what I will do is I will go to the calculation items, and then here I have the default calculation item is created, and the code selected measure is given to you by default. Calculation item is the name, right? And the selected measure is a default code given to you when you create a new calculation item. This may seem a little confusing at first, but selected measure is your one selected measure that you're using to build an entire calculation group. So in our example, that is the sales measure, because remember we deleted all the other measures, we only have one measure right now. So for better understanding, I can create the sales measure as my first item in my calculation group. So in other words, if I created the sales, I can call this sales amount, for example, and this is essentially just selected measure. This will be a little bit more clear if I go back. And so here, this is my, in my values, I have to have my selected measure. So this one measure called sales, I gotta have it in the values section. And then in columns of my matrix, I got no data. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come to the time intelligence group right here and select this one and put it into in columns. And you can see that this got my measure called sales is now replaced by the time intelligence item that I created, the first one that I created. So it's called sales amount. Now what I'm going to do is I will go back to the model view. I will create another calculation item, a new calculation item. So that's going to be sales previous year. So click new item, and here I can rename this sales previous year. The formula is going to be selected measure. Think of this selected measure as your existing sales measure. This is what I mean. So you will create calculate, and your measure is going to be inside, and then the second half of your formula is going to be same period last year. Same period last year, and it's going to be date, just like a regular measure that we created in the beginning. All right, so I have created this sales previous year, and if I go back to the report view, now I have this sales previous year added in columns. So I have sales amount and I have sales previous year. So now I'm going to go ahead and add a bunch of other calculation items so they can be added into my matrix. So I'm going to go to my model view. I'm going to go to the calculation item, and then I'm going to create new calculation item. So let me create year to date, and the formula is calculate, selected measure inside, and that's going to be dates, year to date, and then it's date. And I will actually just copy this formula so I can paste it and quickly create month to date, quarter to date formulas. Calculation items, right? So that's it. Then I will create another calculation item, paste, and then change this to quarter to date. And here is going to be quarter to date as well. Copy this formula, commit, and this will create quarter to date calculation. Then I'm going to click to the calculation items group and then create a new item for month to date. That's going to be MTD. Calculate selected measure. All of this is going to be the same, but here I will choose month to date. All the rest is the same. And I will create another calculation item. This is the item order that I have. If I go to the report view, I can see that the month is first, right? I think this is in alphabetical order. Now, if I want to have the sales amount first, then I can go to the model view, and in the calculation items order, I can drag and drop. So I want to have sales amount first, then I want to have the sales previous year, and then probably year to date, quarter to date, and then month to date. And if I go back to the report view, this is going to change. Now let's go back to the model view and create a couple more measures. Sorry, not measures, calculation items they're called, right? So I'm gonna go new item, and I will create, let's do difference year over year, right? And that's going to be selected measure. So this is our sales measure minus calculate selected measure. Instead of the second half of the formula, what I can do is I can refer to the existing calculation, which is called time intelligence group. This is very long, so I'm going to change this into, so I can see better, right? I can, let me shorten this, and let's do just calculation. All right, what I wanted to do here is in the second half of my formula, I can refer to the existing calculation item in my model. Instead of writing further formula, what I can do is I can do time calculation equals sales previous year. In order to calculate the difference between this year and last year, I'm subtracting last year from my current year. And my current year is selected measure in this case. And then last year is the calculation called sales previous year that I already have. All right, so I will create that. And then if I go to the report view, I have here the difference. If I look at my January numbers here, 324 minus 285 roughly equals to 38,000. So now let me create another calculation group, and that's going to be difference year over year percent. Let me do difference year over year percent. Sorry. And this is going to be a formula called divide, where I am dividing, what am I dividing? Right, I'm dividing this year, and I already have that difference. So I can use the existing measure year over year, and in the denominator, it's going to be calculate selected measure. In the second half of my formula, it's going to be the time calculation for the previous year. So that equals to sales previous year. I hope that makes sense. Let me see if my formula works. All right, let me see where the mistake is. All right, so here's a mistake. You see, instead of selected measure, I selected select column. So you got to be careful here. And the proper formatting, when you're writing, more complex DAX formulas, the proper indentation and formatting really helps you to see potential errors, right? You may just forget a little comma here or a little parenthesis, and your formula will not work. So now it should be fine. So what I'm doing here is basically I am dividing the difference between this year and last year, and then I'm dividing that by last year. So I will commit, and now I go to the report view, and I have a difference, but my percent is all messed up because the formatting is wrong. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the model view and select the percent, and right here it says dynamic format string. Now you see all of these calculation items by default, because they are derivatives of the selected measure, which is the sales measure, and it is formatted as currency, as the dollar amount, then automatically all of these calculation items will have the same formatting. Now, so if I want to change that individual item, I can come here and then select this button right here. It says dynamic formatting string, and for this particular measure. And in the formula bar right here, what I will do is I will click 0.00%. So I'm giving a custom formatting for an individual calculation item. And now I should have a proper percent. All right. Now this looks a lot better. I'm going to go back to the model view, and I'm going to create my last calculation item, and that's going to be running total. And I'm going to just copy this formula that I have, and it's a running total where I am calculating selected measure, the same formula as I used before. This will create a running total calculation item. So if I go back to a report view, I now have a whole bunch of calculations, actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 calculation items. All right, now that we have created the calculation group and 8 calculation items, you might be asking, yeah, we created these individual measures or items, but that wasn't that much faster than the old way. In fact, it took me exactly the same time to create these measures manually. That's true if you have one calculation group for one measure. Now, if I create another measure, for example, quantity, let me actually do that. So what I'm going to do is I'll come here to my sales table and I will create my second measure, which is going to be called quantity. And that is a sum of the units, the column called units from my sales table. And the formatting here, if I added it, let me do a proper formatting here with a 1000 separator. And then these are whole numbers, so I can't have any decimals. It's not a decimal number, it's a whole number. All right, and let me move my matrix down so I can see it better. So now that I have created a new measure called quantity, I can simply replace the sales measure here with the new measure, and all of my existing calculation items will now be related to units, not sales. This is what I mean. So I'm going to remove the sales measure, and I'm going to put the quantity measure in values. And now all of these numbers are related to units. So now the selected measure is not the sales, but it's quantity. So now I have two different measures. What makes sense is for me to go back to the model view and actually change the names of my sales amount, because this may not be sales only, right? This could be also for quantity. So what I will do, I will rename this to current year total, and then sales previous year, that's going to be called previous year total. Okay? Now that makes more sense. So now instead of creating another 8 different measures for quantity separately, right? I can just swap the selected measure and all of my existing calculations will be updated accordingly. Now what I can do, I can select my sales table and create a third measure, which I could call average. And that's going to be average of my sales amount. So now I created this average measure, and then I can remove quantity and then put average, and these calculation groups will reflect. Granted, not all of them will make sense for average, right? For example, year-over-year difference, it doesn't really make sense. But for last year, for this year, for year-to-date, month-to-date, these are the average number of sales. So now, if I put all of these 3 measures that I created together in my matrix, then my table becomes a little too cluttered. I mean, essentially, I have 24 calculation items here, 8 for each measure. Now, instead of putting all of the measures together, what you can do, you can use another new feature called field parameters. And then you can put a slicer and then select a certain measure from that field parameter, and that's going to change the measures. But before I do that, let me actually do a little formatting. I'm going to come here, and here I will add the all selection. And what I like to do is to add a little shade in here, right? So then I will copy this slicer, and right here in the field section of my slicer, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add my calculation group. And now all of these items are now in the calculation group. And what I mean by that is I can select only individual calculation groups. So depending on who you are and what you need to calculate, you can select which measures you would like to display. Again, not all of them have to be displayed. And now what I will do, move my matrix a little bit to the right so there's more space. And then I will add another slicer. No, actually, no, sorry. What I will do is I'm going to come to modeling. I'm going to add a field parameter feature. So what you will do, you will go to the modeling, and then here you will find the new parameter button. And then we're going to indicate fields. You can just leave the name as is, doesn't matter, or you can call it measure selector. And then from the sales table, you are going to indicate the measures that you would like to select. So that's going to be sales, quantity, and average. And then this is going to add slicer to the page by default and just create a slicer. All right. And now I have this new slicer right here. And I should select the sales, but let me see what I'm doing wrong here. Oh, that's right. That's right. This is what I need to do. I will remove the values and the measure selector, the field parameter which I just created, this one here. I will drag this into the values of my matrix. So your matrix is going to have calculation groups and columns, and then in values you're going to put the measure selector, right, the field parameter which you just created, and then in rows you're going to have your time dimension. And so what you do is when you select your field parameter for sales, quantity, or average, then you're going to see different numbers. And now you can select quantity, for example, and then you can do current year total, year to date, and difference year over year. But then if you want to see sales, you can do sales. And now all of your calculation items are going to change to reflect the sales related calculation items. If you want to do averages, if that makes sense, then obviously it's going to change to averages. So to sum up, using the calculation groups and field parameters, you no longer need to create multiple measures for similar calculations. You can better organize and simplify the data model. It's so much easier to manage your measures and create dynamic calculations across various measures. All right, I hope you liked this video. If you're interested in Power BI, consider subscribing to our channel. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll talk to you later.